You're going to come to the conclusion, if you'll kind of get away from denominational churches and the way that they interpret things and go back to just the text, you're going to understand, okay, these are all the same office. So we've got bishop or overseer. We've got elder or presbyter. Okay, presbyter is really not even used anymore. And then we've got pastor and shepherd. They all are somewhat interchangeable, but the two I linked together are really interchangeable. Okay, you'll see that same Greek word, sometimes translated pastor, sometimes translated shepherd. You'll see that same Greek word almost always translated as elder, but occasionally as presbyter. You'll see the same Greek word sometimes translated bishop or overseer. And you'll understand that there are little connotations with each term. So I say an overseer, that's somebody who what? Oversees. Okay? It has managerial connotations to it. When you think about a pastor or a shepherd, you're thinking what? Of one who leads a flock. Okay? Not the same thing, but it is the same thing. It's just highlighting a different capacity to that. Okay? And so, that's why some of these things are put here, because these fit him for the role. Let me say this too. There's a careful balance here. A shepherd is a very, very, very important role. Okay? Not just anybody can be a shepherd. Okay? Not just anybody. You say, well, they did this or that. Okay, that's great. But not just anybody can be an elder. Okay? It is a special role. It is a unique role, and it requires unique qualities to do the job. But I would say this. It's not this high, lofty thing that's not attainable either. Okay? So we need to see this careful balance here. I've made the point that he's not an individual who is, how should I say this now? He's a Christian who's getting it right. Think about it like that. A lot of the things that he's called to do or called to be, every Christian is called to be. He's just getting it right. Okay? He's not a super Christian, he's a successful Christian. Do you understand that? And I don't mean that in a worldly sense. I don't mean that in a monetary sense. But let me give you just one snapshot of that. Verse 2, he must be blameless. Oh, does that mean that any other Christian can come along and just be full of blame? No. Every Christian is supposed to be blameless. You're going to see that pop up in Titus, for example. Okay, every Christian is supposed to be blameless. He's just doing well. He's doing well at it. So he's having some success at being a Christian. We could just do that with several of these. Sober-minded. Oh, does that mean? No, come on. Everybody's supposed to be pursuing these. He's just having some success doing it. Okay. Now look at verse 1. If a man or anyone or something like that, the idea is this is case by case. Okay, you cannot just go and okay, boom, here we go, checklist. That's not how this works. Like I said a second ago, there is some relative discussion that needs to happen with some of these, and there are some judgments. So this is case by case. So if he desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. So God says this is a good work. This is a good work. This is a notable work, this is an important work, this is a significant work. And what's interesting is, he's got to strike a careful balance here of desiring the job and desiring the job for the right reasons. And how are we going to determine that? Well, by us making some judgment calls here. Okay, because you go back up to chapter 1, verse 7, what did Paul talk about the false teachers? Hey, they're desiring to be teachers of the law, chapter 1, verse 7. Same idea. They're desiring this, but we already know from the context they're not desiring it. They're not desiring the right thing, necessarily. They're certainly not desiring it for the right reasons. And so you come over to the eldership in chapter 3, verse 1. There is an authority with this role. There is a lot of pressure and responsibility with this role. He's got to desire it. But he's got to desire it for the right reasons. And the other things he mentions here help us determine, is he doing this for the right reason? Okay? Because if he's not doing it for the right reason, some of the things that are going to be mentioned will expose that. One of the big issues in Timothy is hypocrisy. And what's several of the things he's going to mention in this text? This is the hypocrisy barometer. It's really hard to hide hypocrisy in every category of your life. Okay? You might be able to fake it and make it here, but we start looking at your home, all of a sudden hypocrisy is going to show up, isn't it? Okay? So that's why some of these things flavor the way they do. The home is the proving ground for the eldership. Okay? I'm making a couple of premature comments here, okay, that I think will help us as we go through the text a little bit. Let me say this too. Sometimes we have the idea of, well, let's appoint this person and he'll develop and grow in the role. No. He needs to be fit for the role before appointment. We get those backwards sometimes, guys, and we don't do it with just the eldership. We do that with everything. It's like, they just need some experience. Let's let them get up and teach, and they'll get some experience. No, let's make sure they can do it, and then get up and teach and make some, have some experience. But you don't just baptize by fire. I mean, we do that. Well, let's get them some experience leading singing. Let's work with them and get them to where they can do it proficiently, and then turn them loose. Let them do it. Okay. But man, I think sometimes we're just a little quick to, let's get experience, when we need to work at some of the things that need to happen before we get up and do. Okay? Verse 2. So let's work through some of these. A bishop then must be blameless. The idea here is not sinlessly perfect, otherwise that would make no sense in the context of the rest of Christianity. They're not advocating he's got to be sinlessly perfect. And sometimes people look at that like that. I know that elder, he made a mistake. It was 1973 in May of that year, and you'd never believe what he did. Come on, okay? You dig enough, you're going to find something on everybody, because we're none of us Jesus. Okay, sinlessly perfect is not on the prerogative here. So that's not the idea, but it's the same idea for every Christian. We're striving towards this blamelessness. There's no charges can be levied against him. And nothing certainly could be sustained against him. Now, how's that going to play? Verse 2, husband of one wife. The idea here, in fact, in the Greek, it is literally a one-woman man. A one-woman man. And there is a little bit of an idiom here with some of that. We would use maybe a modernized version of this, very similar to that. He's a one-woman kind of guy. Okay? He is faithful to her. He has eyes only for her. He does not wander in his thinking. He does not wander in his eyesight. Now, there's a couple of things about that are so important. A husband of one wife would mean a couple of really important things. Number one, what does that say about the gender of an elder? He's male. So we can go into all the discussions that are happening around us. Churches of Christ who are appointing women elders need to go read 1 Timothy 3 again. A husband of one wife, that's a man, okay? A man of one wife, okay? So not going to be a woman. Think about this too, though. Sometimes individuals read this as polygamy, which wasn't incredibly common in the first century Greco-Roman world, but it would rule out polygamy, okay? He can't have multiple wives. That's just not going to happen. It would also rule out an unmarried person, because he's got to be married to be married. You see that? This is not Wednesday. Y'all should be with me better. But one of the big ones, it would rule out any sort of promiscuity. Now, what was common in the first century Greco-Roman world is a Roman official would have one wife and one mistress. That was not uncommon. Well, stuff like that's not going to fly, is it? Because he's going to be the husband of one wife. He's going to be faithful to her. He's going to have eyes only for her. And generally speaking, congregations have their own kind of cultural, respect for some of these things. But I'll wade off into this for just a second, then we're going to move on. This would not rule out somebody who's divorced scripturally and has now remarried somebody, because he's still a one-woman man, isn't he? How many wives does he have? One. That's it. Okay. There are some discussions to be had about a situation where maybe he is widowed. Some of that takes so much judgment. I do know of some groups that don't believe that a person's got to step down if they lose their wife. He's still faithful to his one woman. He's still a one-woman kind of man. Might make some things difficult, but I mean, the text just says a one-woman man. That's what it says. And so, we need to be careful about some of that. But let's work ahead. So he says, husband of one wife. So you see this whole model for home in his home. Temperate, The idea of being self-controlled, and that's going to come up a couple of times. Sober-minded. He can think clearly and reasonably. Why? Because he's going to have to make some calls, isn't he? He's going to have to make some judgments. So he needs to be able to control himself and have some good thinking of good behavior. He needs to be able to keep himself under pressure. If a situation comes up, and it will, he needs to be able to figure out how to navigate that with some tact and care. He must be hospitable. You think about how that would have actually functioned in the first century world. A situation where there are no Motel 6s, okay? And so what happens when an itinerant preacher comes through, needs a place to stay? Well, he ought to be able to count on an elder somewhere, surely, if nobody else. And so an elder would also be an individual that may be a little older, and so maybe a little more established, and would have the means to support somebody who comes in, perhaps. Not always, but perhaps. So you see, there's pragmatic purposes here. He must be able to teach. Now, when we get into the deacons in a minute, that's not listed. Why is that, I wonder? Well, an elder needs to be able to teach. Now, a big part of that is because they're combating what in Ephesus? False teaching. And who's going to lead the charge against error? Elders. Elders. So the elders in particular need to be able to, convict the gainsayer, as Titus 1:9 says, which is the parallel to this text, by the way. So he needs to be able to teach. He needs to be able to correct. Verse 3, not given to wine. Kind of hard to work with that. It's a rare word in the New Testament. But given the context of Scripture, the idea surely would rule out drunkenness. Oh, come on. Okay, drunkenness is just out of the question. Then he's probably asking for more than that, isn't he? An elder needs to be able to drink in moderation. Okay, well, if you didn't know, I'm preaching on alcohol at the 11. Not going to advocate moderation. Just not. Okay, just not going to do that. You go to read the context of Scripture, that can't be what he's advocating here. Well, an elder needs to be able to hold his bottle. No, come on. He's asking for more than that, surely, because of the context of Scripture. Not violent. He needs to be able to control his temper. All of these things are practical things. Not greedy for money. Why is that? Okay, I'm going to throw this one at you. Why can he not be greedy for money? He handles the church's money. You go read about some of this happening in the book of Acts, and what happens? The funds are laid at the elders' feet. Ooh. And brethren, there was no checks and balances system in the first century culture. Nobody could pull up intrust. I said integrist the other day when I meant intrust. Y'all knew that, and y'all kindly did not correct me. Thank you for that. But you knew what I meant. Nobody goes to amputate a leg at Intrust Bank, okay? Although maybe it feels like that. So, but there's not a line system. Well, okay, we can get our bank statements and we can double check. None of that. They're laying lump sums at the feet of an eldership, and that eldership is having to parse it out and divide it, to the benevolent need or whatever it is. Ooh, you see now why he can't be greedy for money? He's going to be in a situation that could be problematic if he is. He must be gentle. He must not be quarrelsome. He must not be covetous. You see, he's almost amplifying some of this. He's got to be able to control himself. He's got to be able to navigate some pretty tricky situations and still maintain his character, because these all matter in what he's doing with the work. Sometimes verse 3, gentle, we overuse that idea. He's got to be gentle. He's got to be gentle. The other term for an elder, shepherd. Shepherd's always gentle with the sheep? Not always. Not always. You go read Psalm 23, the greatest psalm on shepherding ever. He makes me to lie down. Brethren, historically, that would involve a shepherd striking the sheep on the leg as a cue. Hey, it's time to lay down, big boy. You're where you're supposed to be. It's time to lay down. I mean, that's why they carried the shepherd's crook for correction and for protection. Okay? And so, I mean, we get a little, especially in our, I'm going to say it, I'm going to do this, especially in our sissified culture, we get a little bit too tuned up about this. A shepherd can't ever have a harsh word at all. Oh, come on. Your dad had harsh words too sometimes, didn't he? But he loved you. He did it because he loved you. A shepherd is no different in that respect. And that's going to be important because of what he mentions in the next couple of verses, isn't it? Okay, so verse 4, he must rule his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence, for a man does not know how to rule his own house. How will he take care of the church of God? Down in verse 15, He's going to call the church of God the house of God. Now do you see why his home is so important? If he can't take care of his home, how can he take care of the house of God? This is why the home matters for an elder and what he's going to do. He's got to be able to lead his home. Okay, I want you to think for a second. What is the greatest passage in the Bible on marriage, the relationship between husband and wife, and even a little after that, the home? Anybody know? That was a big one, wasn't it? Now, if you say marriage and you go Song of Solomon, I'll go with you a little bit, okay? Because Song of Solomon's pretty good. One of the longest texts we have, let's narrow it down, the New Testament. Paul's epistles. The greatest text Paul wrote on marriage. I'm going to make you work this morning. This is... Oh, there we go. Ephesians 5. So next week I'm preaching out of that text, Ephesians 5:22 through 33. So Ephesians 5, the greatest text in the New Testament for sure on marriage. Written to who? Ephesians 5. Written to who? The Ephesians. Yeah, that's kind of... Yeah. I was just making sure, you know. What's 1 Timothy written to? To Timothy. Where's Timothy? Ephesus. Huh. Wonder what Paul's got in mind here with some of the comments he's making. Let me tie those two texts together carefully for you. When Paul's advocating, hey, he needs to have his house in order, and when he's advocating he must be the husband of one wife, Paul here has in mind Ephesians 5. His home must model Ephesians 5 to the congregation. He and his wife have got to look like that. So part of what he's doing is connecting those ideas. That's why he doesn't go into more detail in some of those things, because those brethren had already heard those things. They'd already heard the sermons from Ephesians 5. And so that's why his home is so important. His home must model Ephesians 5. Okay? Having his children in submission with all reverence. Boy, that's just a tough one. And again, there's some judgment for this. I do not believe, especially you compare this to Titus chapter 1, I do not believe that an elder has to bat 100, with every child. Every child must be sinlessly perfect. Come on. That's not even attainable. That's not even reasonable. So that's certainly not his point. There is room for judgment when it comes to how we apply this, because there is obviously some ambiguity here. So how do we work with some of that? I think a really good way to handle that is ask the question, did he lead his family like what we read about in Ephesians 5? Did he raise his children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, like Ephesians 6 and verse 4? Not did he bat 1,000. And to maybe kind of amplify that a little bit for your thinking, God's firstborn son was Israel, the nation. Were they faithful? Nope. Nope. And so he sent his perfect son, Jesus Christ, the faithful son. Okay? Go read Hosea 11. Hosea 11 is where God decries the fact that I did everything for you, my son Israel. Oh, I'm going to tell you, that one there will gut you. That's a heartbreaking chapter. I did everything for you, Israel. How can I give you up now? But I will. I will, because you won't come home. They're not faithful. So I don't think this is about batting 1,000. I think there is some judgment here that's going to be required in how we navigate this. Sometimes it's helpful. Individuals who look at this text and they unreasonably try to apply it. Okay, here's an elder and he's 70 years old and he's got children in their 50s now, late 40s, early 50s. Every one of them's got to be faithful or he can't qualify. What if they were faithful for the last 40 years and they fell away in their they fell away in their 40s? Oh, now he's disqualified all of a sudden? Come on. That person's been out of their home for 25 years. Okay? That's not a reflection of him as an elder or him as a man or him as a father. That person has been on their own for 25 years. Nowhere does Paul advocate, churches, if you're going to appoint an elder, you need to hire a private investigator. And you need to go investigate every one of those children to every one of those men you think could be an elder. And if they've got a son that lives in Timbuktu, you need to go hunt them down and make sure they're still serving the Lord. That's not the point. I think that's taken this to an unrealistic, unreasonable place. That's not the point at all, okay? The point is, did he love his wife like Christ loved the church? Okay? Did he raise his children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? Okay, Ephesians 5 and Ephesians 6, verses 1 through 4. That's the point. Maybe, some of these would be really ruled out if we started asking the practical question of, do you want to trust this person with your soul? Do you want to trust your soul to this person who's going to watch out for you? Hebrews 13:17. They're watching out for your souls as those who must give account. Do you trust your soul to this person? That'll make you pretty picky. That might make you more picky than the text is. But you see, folks, let's think practically here about some of that, okay? Let's move ahead. Verse 6. Obviously, not a novice. He can't be inexperienced. If you appoint somebody who's not equipped for the role, not qualified, not experienced, not ready, you're setting a fella up for failure. And that's kind of the idea. He can get really sucked into pride here and end up in the condemnation as the devil, or condemned with the devil would be the idea. And so verse 7, he must have a good testimony. You think about this. He's got to have a good testimony in the church, a good testimony in his home, and a good testimony in the community. That will help you navigate whether or not this fellow's a hypocrite. Okay, you can rule out a lot of people pretty quick by looking at those three places. Now here's what you need to understand. Verse 7 is not a blanket statement either. You ever known a situation where a person did what was right and they were still, talked bad about in the corporate world? They still were talked bad about by their buddies or by their coworkers because they stood up what was right. They wouldn't do what was wrong. So this is not, obviously, a big old blank statement that would encompass every possible scenario. Paul did not have good testimony in lots of places. Jesus didn't have a good testimony in lots of places. It's kind of the whole part where he was crucified, So let's think about it practically. Okay, really tough there. Questions?
What if a man only has one child and needs every other?
That's a good question, and it has been a big subject of debate. But here's how I think we should do that. Paul is not saying a situation where, okay, he's only got one child, he's not fit then. No, that's not it. Think about it like this. You go and fill out any kind of paperwork, and it will say, are you married? Check. And it will say, children. Do you not put check if you only have one? Oh, well, I only have a child, so I better put 0 there. No, because children would include one or more. So, maybe that's a helpful way to think about it. But, and I've heard people make the argument, well, if he only has one, he doesn't really know how to help other, come on. I think about one of my children, and that little psycho is all over the place. I feel perfectly at home with. Actually, I don't feel perfectly at home. I'm scared. I don't feel safe. But anyways, think about that. I understand some of the argument for that, but I just don't see that as consistent with this text. I don't see it consistent in general. Anything else?
I think what has happened, you're talking about the checklist.
Yes.
Is that, I've seen some really good men passed over because of this checklist.
Yeah.
We traditionally, the Church of Christ, have got this tradition that it's got to be this way.
Yeah.
Because I've known lots of men who were great elders, or would have been great elders, but they did not teach a class.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't teach a class, but their life and their examples and the leading of people and the dedication they have to the Lord,
Yeah.
that they were eliminated because they could not sit in front of a class and like we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's been going on for years.
Sure.
We do not have a checklist.
Yeah.
And it's too bad.
Yeah.
But I think hopefully we grow.
Yeah. I think generally speaking, it is tempting. I understand why we get into that mindset, because to the point, every one of these things matters. Every one of them matter. Okay, you can't appoint a guy if you're sitting there thinking, he doesn't fit that. He just doesn't fit that. But like we're talking about, able to teach. Does that mean he's got to be able to get up in the pulpit and preach? Does that mean he's got to be able to teach a Bible class? What about a one-on-one study? If he can sit down with somebody and teach them one-on-one, isn't that still able to teach? So we've got to use some careful respectful judgment when it comes to how we apply this, okay? But that's not to say that it doesn't matter, because every one of them matter, okay? But we've got to understand that there's some judgment here in how we're trying to find this fella who meets this. I will say this too, though. One of the worst things you can do is appoint somebody who's not qualified, okay? Appoint somebody who's not ready for the role, who's not fit for the role. Ooh, you talk about ruining a church. It can happen in a hurry, and so we got to be careful about that too. Let's look ahead here, because the deacons, a lot of the things he mentions here is going to follow on that same vein of thinking. Verse 8, likewise the deacons must be reverent, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy for money, holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. And let these also first be proved, then let them serve as deacons, being found blameless. Now, the deacon here, similar idea. He's got to be one who is honorable. Some sense it may be that he is to be respectable. It's not necessarily his disposition. Well, he needs to be a reverent person. I mean, that's kind of a yes, but maybe that he's respectable, that he's somebody we could have respect for. Not double-tongued. He can't be one of these individuals who's going to talk out of both sides of his mouth. He's got to be able to be trusted. You see how that fits with the whole context of false teachers, hypocrisy, and deceitfulness? This person can't be that. They've got to be trusted. Not given to much wine, not greedy for money. Both of those ideas are going to kind of play into his work. And the same content would be applied here about not given to much wine. And so he's not going to be a person who's turning to the bottle. That's just not who he is. And greediness, just as problematic. Why? Because the deacons are handling some of the funds. They're going out and doing some of the work, and they're doing out some of the benevolent stuff. They can't be greedy. So they've got to be able to hold the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. So same idea is going to be repeated for the elders in Titus 1, that they have to hold to the gospel. These people in this position, elders and deacons, they need to be able to hold the true faith. And in contrast to the false teaching of those around them. And how they do that is with a pure conscience. So what they're holding is the true faith. How they're holding it is with a pure conscience. In contrast, chapter 4, verse 3, those who have a seared conscience. So deacons, elders, I mean that's implied here. Verse 10, they must first be proved. Same idea. We get to thinking, well, let's appoint them and they'll mature in the role. No. They need to be fit for the role before they're put in the role. Okay? And so they must be proved. He doesn't state how that proving happens. There is nothing in this text that says, well, it's a multiple choice question. And he really needs to be able to at least answer 7 out of 10. Needs to get a 70% at least on the test. Nothing like that. But there is some judgment here in how we apply this. May be argued that his proving ground is likewise in the home, because verses 11 and 12 fit right back into the home. His home is going to be where we look at a lot of this. Okay, so how does that fit? Verse 11, likewise their wives must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. Well, you got to ask, why does he not mention an elder's wife earlier? I think generally speaking, because of elders and their wives are going to be a little older, they're already established. A lot of this stuff is not up for question anymore because they're older, they're more experienced, they've been married longer, they know their roles a little better. So maybe he mentions the younger category, deacons and their wives, because there's still some growing, maturing, and developing in that category. Okay? Now, I am aware, verse 11, your New American Standard just says women. And so there are some scholars who take a view that says this is a separate category. You've heard of deacons and a deaconess. Well, a deaconess is a female deacon. Here's the deal. Phoebe and Synchrea, Romans 16, 1 and 2. There is such a thing as an official office, the deacons, and an unofficial servant, like Phoebe. And so I'm aware of some of that going on here. I don't think it's as consistent. He's going to turn, this woman's got to be faithful. She's got to be dependable. Verse 12, the deacon's got to be the husband of one wife. Same idea, husband of one wife, a one-woman man. He's got to be faithful to her. She's got to be faithful to him. They got to be living up Ephesians 5. Got to rule their children in their own house as well. So the language he uses here suggests this is a younger person. Okay? Notice no ability to teach required. It's not the same office. He doesn't have that authority. He doesn't have that role of leadership. But he does have to make sure his home fits the bill. We can't go in and just, oh, well, it's not that big. No, it is a big deal. It's a very big deal. He's got to fit the role. And so verse 13, those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a good standing and great boldness in the faith which is in Christ Jesus. You got to love this. They're not greedy for money, verse 8. They're not seeking materialism and material things, but verse 13, they're seeking God's approval. That's what's going to get them. They're seeking God's approval. They've served well. They have a good standing and great faith with God. And that's what they want, okay? Questions on that? We didn't spend as much time on deacons because they're not as important. And that's right, guys. I'm looking at you. No, I'm kidding, okay? Without them, we have no sound or electricity or a lot of... So anyway, questions on that section? Okay, let's do some applications. I know the first bell already rang. This is your chance. Go ahead. No. This is a great question, by the way, though. So I am just a preacher. I am just a preacher, but I am under the oversight of our elders. Okay? And so that's a great question because generally speaking, people view me as a pastor. I'm not a pastor. Okay? A pastor is a shepherd. A pastor is an elder. It's the same office. We have two pastors in this congregation. Okay? Billy and Larry. And so there are two shepherds, our pastors, our elders, bishops, that idea. But no, I'm just a gospel preacher, just a servant in this congregation under their oversight, and here to deride the deacons. So, yes, Norma. Yes. That's a great question, by the way, because sometimes individuals say, well, if he's a preacher, he can't be an elder. 1 Peter chapter 5 would make a case for an elder and preacher serving in the same role. Peter says, I who am a fellow elder. So Peter is an apostle, elder, and preacher. Okay, he's a three-hat wearing dude. All right, but that's 1 Peter 5, 1 through 4. Okay, so yes, great question, Norma. But yes, anything else? Tough one to apply, though, isn't it? You think, okay, how do we apply this? Well, I'm gonna help you out here. Number one, not just anyone can be an elder. Character and leadership are required. Okay? Character and leadership are required. Number two, not just anyone can be a deacon. Character and service are required. The word deacon means servant. Okay? And it's used, and that's some of the issues people look at, like, oh, a woman who's a deacon. The word's a servant. Phoebe is a servant of the church in Cenchrea, Romans 16, 1 and 2. Some have interpreted that to be a deaconess, a female officed deacon or something. I don't think that that's really consistent. But it does beg, this person is a servant. We're all supposed to be servants, though. Okay, they have an official role of service. We have unofficial roles of service. All right? Number three, you started to think I was going to say not just anyone could be a wife, huh? Yeah. I guess it's true, though. Men cannot. Sorry. Number three, wives always matter. Character and self-control required. You need to think about this. Just because it's not mentioned in connection to the elders, that would still be implied. This situation, I've known of some really good men who I had no confidence in their wives. And I would have opposed their names being put forward because I'm going to tell you what, you guys think my little woman is quiet here. She is my primary helpmeet in the home. Okay? There's just not a whole lot that I don't do where I don't ask her thoughts on it first. Okay? Because she is way smarter than I is and has a whole lot better head on her shoulders than I do. So, an elder, his wife is his refuge. And so you look at the deacons and their wives, that's going to help. Elder and his wife would no less be important. Okay? So don't read this and say, well, an elder's wife can pretty much do anything she wants because it doesn't say. That's no. Let's back away from that. That's not it at all. So character and self-control required. Number four, we should all aspire to these qualities and characteristics. No one becomes a leader by accident. You do not wake up one day and go, well, I think I'll just go be an elder now. That's not how that works. It takes years. Okay? It takes years of proving yourself, proving your home, proving your leadership, proving your love for the Lord. It takes years. I would say, especially, we're blessed with so many young families in this congregation. Aspire to be an elder and his wife. Okay? We need good elders. We've got 2 good elders here. The world needs good elders, okay? All right, thank you for your careful attention. I'm so ready to get into non-controversial sections, all right? Let's work on verses 14 through 4 and verse 5 on Wednesday. Appreciate your time this morning.